welcome to Law Talk, the show that brings the events of the day with a constitutional perspective. And myself, James Barrett, and Mark Malachowski are here to present for you. Mark, what do we have tonight?
Well, first we're starting with the VA problem. There's problems with the Veterans Administration and treatment of veterans.
Okay, we're talking about the scandal that's graced the headlines now for about a month and a half, 2 months.
Well, phony scandal. Yeah.
Oh, it's a phony scandal.
Phony scandal,
okay.
yeah.
Well, let's pretend, let's address the phony scandal. The scandal does involve, there's a wide, it's interesting because it involves so many different aspects. We have all these veterans coming back from 2 wars, Afghanistan and Iraq, plus we have all the veterans that have served in prior wars. And now I understand the Veterans Administration has been playing some games on how they schedule appointments to be treated or to have examinations.
Well, I tried to get a guest on the show from the Veterans Administration, someone who worked there. But apparently I think what the big issue is here is there's a pervasive culture of fear.
Are we talking about the whistleblower overtones for coming on and then being persecuted because you did say something?
Well, in this big of an operation, right, where now 40 veterans apparently have died because they were on these secret waiting lists and because there was quotas, and maybe more. They're coming up with more and more problems. And we don't even know, tens of thousands, 60,000, 100,000, who knows exactly how many people have been delayed and delayed. But anyway, it's a huge thing. But the mid-level bureaucrats were forced to fake these reports. They didn't want to, but they were afraid not to.
Wait a minute, Mark. You've just brought up a couple of different things I want to get clear for our viewers. Number one, when you talk about fake lists or hidden lists, what are you actually referring to?
Well, a lot of these lists were destroyed.
Destroyed by who?
Destroyed by whoever the conspirators were. Now, there was someone who came out and was a whistleblower and said, hey, look, these things are missing. They've been, this is what happened. But yeah, as far as obstruction of justice, they made lists so they can meet their quotas. Now, let's explain. There's 2 basic theories on this. One is it's Bush's fault. So apparently all this happened under Bush's control and it just came to light now.
Oh, 5 years after the...
No, 14 years later, they thawed out the bodies or whatever.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and that's one theory is it's all Bush's fault.
Oh, okay.
And on the other theory is like, well, wait a minute. The Veterans Administration got more money than ever. They had plenty of money, but they are in this culture of fear. And the other theory is this culture of fear is kind of, well, if you go back to Paul Krugman, right? In 2006, he said the VA is a triumph of socialist medicine, right? And that's the future. It's a triumph.
Well, wait a minute. Let's. Are we talking about kind of aligning this with the same idea, the Affordable Care Act?
Exactly.
Okay, so the Veterans Administration is like the
single payer.
It's a single payer system, and it's also the VA system is the largest number of hospitals in the country that are all affiliated. So if this is like a precursor, what's going to happen when the population has the Affordable Care Act turn into a single payer system?
Well, what's interesting about this is they had quotas, and they said, hey, look, if people only wait so long, right, then you've met your quota and you're rewarded for quotas. Now, when we're looking at quotas, we go back to, and I would encourage people to go, look this up on their, website. It's called a Holodomor, right? The Holodomor. Now, that was a Soviet land management scheme where they collectivize things. So it's collectivization. So basically what we're talking about is we're taking the medical care in this country, we have collectivized it, right? And if you look in the past of what happens to collectivization, if you look back to 1933 under Stalin, you collectivize all the farms, and in the breadbasket of Europe, the grain capital of Europe, which is Ukraine, the best land you could possibly grow wheat in, they put in quotas and said you have to produce this much grain, and that's how it shall be. In fact, this capitalism, this free market thing, everything was confiscated, the land was confiscated, livestock was confiscated, and the government did everything by quotas. And what was the result of that?
Well, we know it was all a failure. It turned into the Soviet Union, and at that point it became a basic monetary failure because there's no way you can run an empire on quotas. And this is interesting.
Well, what happened in that particular case, production fell by 70%. 7 million people starved to death.
There's your failure.
Well, it wasn't a failure for the government, though. The government goal was not to feed people, and it wasn't to make money. The government goal was to have complete control over the populace. Right?
Well, wait a minute. Now you're giving an analogy that's like the Veterans Administration.
Exactly.
Because they have such control over the doling out the medical treatments for our veterans.
They have a death list, and if if you're loyal, you don't go on the death list. If you're disloyal, or you might be disloyal,
Or you talk too much.
then they had it back there. They had a thing called the kulaks, right? And the kulaks were like rich peasants who had land, who could hire people. These people were sent to Siberia, where most of them, like a third of them, froze to death, and everything was confiscated. And 7 million people starved to death. And so that was a big success for socialized farming, because they didn't really care about so much about, okay, we have more farm products. In fact, what happened is the people got less and less. The government procurements went up and up.
Well, of course, then you start developing the levels of government that are above the masses, and
Right.
those people are all making the money, and everyone below that are not. So
Well,
you
it's
actually
a
don't
big-
have a middle class. You have a separation. You have the,
Well, you have the
ultra
elite.
poor, the top,
Yeah.
and the bottom.
And
There's
so
nothing in between.
So what they called this at this point was decolonization. What I would call what's going on now with Obama's collectivization of the medical system and putting people on death lists, rewarding people who are loyal, and leaving the people that aren't loyal to die. I would call that decapitalization.
I got a question. Is this anywhere in the book by Sal Linsky? Is this another one of the tenets of the empire of fear that we have running our country right
And
now?
so what happened here is they had the quotas, and you had a certain grain production, and if you didn't meet what they thought you could meet, when they were completely wildly unrealistic quotas, right? You can never meet them. The troops cordoned off those areas. You didn't get any food into them, and they took away their seed for next year's crops. Those were confiscated, and then that was a massive
well, wait
famine.
a minute. So if we start using the seed as analogy for health care, if you're taking away the health care, but you're promising that you're doing something, you're in fact regulating it so heavily that very few people can actually use the healthcare
Well,
system
the thing is,
to be able to get healed.
The government has complete discretion of who gets care and who doesn't. And that is a political weapon. We've got 40 people who are now dead, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when they talked about this dekulakization, they said that the liquidation of the kulaks is a class. So what they were looking at is liquidation, right? In other words, these people by government edict are eliminated.
But wait a minute, are you trying to say that same theory is being put into the healthcare system for the veterans, and because of that, even though there's been far more money poured into the Veterans Administration, there's been more money in the last 5 years poured into the Veteran Administration than has been in the prior 20, that even with that coming in, this excess of money, that they're cutting the health care back for the veterans that need it the most?
Well, what it's doing, it's a symbolic. It shows that the government is in complete control now, and they can have a death list, and they can do whatever they want. And if you talk about it, then this culture of fear.
You go on the death list.
You go on the death. Well, you'd lose your pension. You'd be discredited. You get hounded by the IRS. You're hounded by the FBI.
Yeah, well, this is the whistleblower.
The weight of the central government crushes you.
Yeah, well, this is the whistleblower that I'm talking about, because I know that this is one of the largest whistleblower cases that's just come up. And it's interesting, the newspapers and the typical media is not really hitting the whistleblower.
Well, but media is the Ministry of Truth.
Yeah, of course, it's a spokes group for the administration. But the problem is, whistleblower is a statute that says that if you report something that's a danger to the general community and you're retaliated against, you win automatically. It's a black and white kind of law. It's a statutory crime. You say...
That was in the olden days.
No, it's in the modern days, and I'll tell you why. A lot of people thought whistleblower statutes were hard to prove, but in this
so Eric Holt will run in and prosecute all these whistleblower statutes.
I don't know about Eric Holder. I think we're going to have to wait for
right.
another administration for that. But I do believe the whistleblower statute, in fact, Dodd-Frank brought up whistleblower. But you know what? Why don't we leave this, because I think what we have to do is see how it plays out a little bit. So why don't we look at, what's our next subject tonight, Mike?
Okay, so anyway, but I did want to mention James Buchanan, Public Choice Politics, and he's a professor who died a few weeks ago, and he
Was
really...
he on a VA?
Yeah. Okay, so anyway, the next thing we want to talk about is number 2, the false arrest. Okay, Constitutional Corner. Well, here we have a situation where a county sheriff, Joseph Quiles, T-boned one Tanya.
Wait a minute, when you say
Weyker.
T-bone, what do you mean?
He drove his car into the middle of her
Are you
car.
talking about through a stop sign?
Well, he coincidentally he actually ran a stop sign, but he left that out of his police report.
Oh, he left that out.
Oh yeah, he just like oops, how did that happen? He left that out of the police report, and of course that would be a misdemeanor,
Would
right?
that also be his blaming on the video?
Yeah, well, the thing is, it wasn't his dash cam video, but apparently there's a surveillance video that shows that the cop ran the stop sign.
Wait a minute. The cop ran the stop sign. He runs into a car. Then what happened?
Well, he arrested the victim for
Wait a minute.
DUI.
Was he driving a police car at the time or a plainclothes car?
I believe it was the sheriff's car.
He was driving a sheriff's car, runs a stop sign, hits a car. Now
T-bones.
He T-bones a car. Now what happened to the person in the car that he hit?
Well, the person in the car was like slurring.
Oh.
Was slurring, couldn't do the field sobriety test.
After being hit by a car,
After being T-boned,
I would think there'd be a problem.
Well, she broke her neck. You know.
Yeah,
and so, but
I think that's a little difficult to start walking the line if you have a broken neck.
Well, anyway, so that was the reason they arrested her for driving under the influence.
They arrested her for driving under the influence.
Oh, yes.
But she was the one in the right of way.
She was slurring her words, couldn't, stand with one foot, couldn't do.
But she had a broken neck.
Well, yeah, every one of these rotten criminals has an excuse.
You mean you get pulled over for DUI, everyone has an excuse that I have a broken neck.
Right.
And I just got hit by a police car.
Yeah. And so anyway, she was blamed for the collision, right? The DA charged her with the DUI.
The DA charged her?
Yeah. And now even after the videotape showed that the cop ran the stop sign and ran into her, the DA still wanted her to pay for all the damages.
Was the cop drunk?
We don't know. The cop wasn't tested.
So he wasn't tested, so we don't even know if he was intoxicated or not.
We don't know. So anyway, but the issue is the cop filed a false police report, right? But that hasn't been charged against him. And that would be a misdemeanor.
Well, that's that discretion of the district
attorney. And so, but the DA hasn't gone after the cop for filing a false police report. And also, not only did the cop file the police report that said it was her fault, which was contradicted by the video, which is what saved her, he also filed for disability.
Well, disability, it's a right. If you're a union member, disability is a right. And so what happened when he filed? Did he get the disability?
Well, I think that's still being looked at right now. But what's interesting about this is, when you go in front of a judge, you go in front of a jury, everyone says, oh, the cops are always telling the truth and the defendant's always lying. Well, here you've got the videotape that contradicts that. And this guy, basically framed Tanya Weyker. It was a false arrest, a false police report. And it shows that, the police aren't all that perfect all the time. They can be filing false reports to cover their arrears.
Well, in a case like that, I think what has to happen is the district attorney. Now, is this a large community or a small community?
Well, this is Milwaukee.
Milwaukee?
So, yeah.
So we're not talking about a little corner store where everyone knows everybody. We're talking about a city.
Right.
Okay, and are we talking about a city that is this a city police officer?
No, this is a county sheriff.
A county sheriff.
Milwaukee County Sheriff, Joseph Quiles.
Okay, now I have a question.
Or Quiles.
Has anything about his recitation of the accident, has it ever been questioned?
Well, I mean, it was contradicted by the video, and that was the saving grace. And now there's, this happened in February of 2013. So the fight goes on.
Okay, so I have a question. Did he get his disability?
I don't know. At this point, we don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't think he has yet, but he did file for it. But Tanya Weyker, Weyker, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. She's got a broken neck. She's out of work. She's got medical bills. And, she was charged with a DUI based on a false police report. And she was only saved by the video.
Well, I got a question. Did she try to file a lawsuit against the city for the sheriff or the county for the county sheriff that ran into her?
Well, I think there's legal action going on now.
Okay, so, and her main piece of evidence is the video.
That's what saved her. Yeah, without that video, she would have been probably convicted of the DUI.
Well, I got a question. Was the DUI dropped?
Yeah, I think the DUI has been dropped because when they took her blood, she was 0.00.
So that means she had no alcohol in her system.
Absolutely not.
And no drugs in her system.
Cold sober.
Cold sober. Instead, she's got a broken neck. How's that going for her? Is she
Well, I mean,
recovered?
I think a broken neck's not good. I mean, from the picture I saw, she had the neck brace, but I don't know the date of that picture. But I'm saying a broken neck is not something that can be taken lightly. I mean, that's for the rest of your life. Once you break
broken
your neck
is pretty much you're in trouble.
Yeah.
Okay, so now what? So we don't know if the officer actually secured his disability. We don't know. We know that the charges were dropped against her.
Right.
And we don't know what the status of the civil case.
Well, the DA still wanted her to pay for the damages. So I don't know how that.
To the police car?
Yeah, the police car. Yeah, yeah, right. So, and probably for his disability. So I don't know if that's.
No, they're not going to pay for the disability. They could pay for. They could charge her for the damages to the police.
Well, wait
car.
a minute. No, if she's at fault, she'd be liable for his injuries.
Yeah,
too,
but
right?
if she's at fault, her insurance should pay for that.
Yeah.
But
well,
if she's not at
the
fault,
same thing,
I will tell you, her insurance company's not going to accept fault in this accident because even though that her individually may not be able to do much, her insurance company will because they'll seek subrogation from the county sheriff's department.
Yeah, but for this surveillance video.
Thank God.
But for that surveillance video, she would be on the hook for the whole thing.
But I got a question. That surveillance video, that video, did that cause a riot?
I don't think it caused, well, no, I don't think it caused a riot, no.
Okay, so we have a video, and that video still exists.
To my knowledge, yeah. Now, what's interesting, I don't know, it was called a surveillance video, so I don't know if that was actually the
I thought it was a traffic video.
I don't know if it's the red light video, but I think if it's surveillance, it might have been from a shop or something,
Well, that would have been pretty good because then it wouldn't be in the hands of the authorities.
Right. Well, if the dash cam video probably would get lost. I mean, I've worked on worked on Discovery with dash cam videos, and they
get lost.
They tend to. Well, oh, wait a minute. Oh, with that dash.
Yeah, I know. We've both done that. We know how the dash cam video. For some reason, they can't get it from the police station to the district attorney, but they seem to get every other piece of evidence without problem.
Well, it depends what's on the dash cam video.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. That's where mysteriously the tape wasn't on.
Well, yeah, the tape wasn't on, or they lost that, or there was something wrong with the machine, yeah.
Or it wasn't calibrated properly.
Yeah, it wasn't calibrated.
And what happens when it's not calibrated? You know what happens? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We can't show that the officer was at fault.
Right, right. So I'm just saying, on this particular one, there was lucky, and I just don't know about the video. I haven't seen the video. I don't know, but I'm assuming that possibly it was just a store or something had a surveillance video and it picked this up.
Yeah. Well, I have a question.
And that's all. It brings up an interesting thing is because like if you get pulled over a cop and you say I want to tape this or I want to videotape this, right? They can hit you with obstruction.
Obstruction of justice.
They can obstruction.
And that happens a lot here.
It happens a lot. So if you say, look, I want to tape this conversation. That may be enough for resisting arrest or assault on a police officer.
Well, you realize that for resisting
on the other
arrest,
hand, the cops can tape it, and if it's good for them, they keep it. If it's not good for them, it
they
disappears.
destroy it. It didn't happen. Okay, well, let's pay attention to how that case goes forward because it's an interesting case.
Well,
so
we'll
what's
see
our third subject tonight, Mark?
Well, the third subject is EB5s.
EB5, we're talking about a visa-type immigration status.
Yeah, it's immigration for investors. And if they qualify, they can possibly get a green card or lawful permanent residence.
But aren't there a lot of strings attached to qualify?
Well, the biggest string is they've got to come up with $1 million.
Well, that's a lot of foreign investors. That doesn't seem to be a big string. It just seems to be a string.
And also they have to have a high tolerance for risk.
High tolerance for risk. Why do you say that?
Well, because they're supposed to take that $1 million and invest it in a new commercial enterprise.
Right.
And if you look at startups, a lot of them fail.
I know they do.
And so they've got to be able to, take that risk of putting $1 million in something not working.
Well, you realize $1 million is not that much money for a startup.
I think it's like $1 million of vineyard in Napa now. 1 acre is $1 million. Yeah. So that's just dirt.
Yeah.
So yeah, $1 million doesn't go as far as it used to. But yeah, not only do you have to put the $1 million and put it in business and have that a successful business, but for 2 years after your I-525 is approved, I-526 is approved, you've got to employ 10 full-time workers.
Yeah, well, so they're actually with $1 million is going is to employ 10 workers. It's a kind of back to work act.
Right.
But it's to be funded by somebody that's coming here that wants a visa to stay here.
Right.
So, okay, so we have somebody coming in. Now, what other conditions are there?
Well, one thing about it is that they want it to be clean money.
When you say clean money, does that mean well washed in a washer and a dryer, or do you mean that it's traceable?
Well, they want to be able to trace the money back and say, what's the source? Is this a legitimate source of money?
You say a legitimate source, but when money's coming from overseas, what is actually legitimate?
Well, you would have to show how it was earned or how it was acquired.
Okay, but what if it's inherited?
Well, then that would be another issue. But you want to trace it. That's going to be up to the the immigration people are going to look at this money and say, is this clean money?
Well, wait a minute. I understand that this program has been coming under a lot of scrutiny because there seems to be a lot of we're coming in, you give us the visa, but in reality, there's no $1 million, maybe no $100,000, and in reality, people are getting handed the visa, and the money's not going to a new enterprise. It's going to somebody who shuffles the money and then gives it back in some format, so they actually don't have any risk on the money.
Well, yeah, that could be a problem if there was an audit on the.
Well, isn't the IRS enforcing this?
The IRS is looking at this, and you've got immigration looking at this. So I would say that, yeah, that it's coming under more and more scrutiny. Now, what's interesting about this is that, so that'd be the first thing. It's got to be clean money. It's got to come from a legitimate source. Also, you have to be able to risk it. You've got to be able to run a business. Now, running a business, employing 10 people for 2 years, it's pretty expensive.
Well, it seems as though that $1 million get burned pretty fast.
Yeah,
and you're supposed to be paying them a working wage, right?
Right.
It's none of this $5 an hour routine. You're going to have to be paying them a real wage
So
to do some kind of work.
That's why it's a risk. Now, there's another aspect of it. There's also the targeted employment area, right? And that
isn't that an area that's underprivileged or underutilized for a business, right?
Well, like say Detroit. They say Detroit, somewhere that's been like collectivized for many years, and they were bankrupt many times over, and they get bailout after bailout. So basically, I would say that going back to that would be something that, there's a very tough economic, hard to get investment there. Then you only have to come up with $500,000 rather than $1 million.
Right. Okay.
But it's a higher risk.
Yeah, but the whole thing is, but the investors that come from overseas, they've got to understand the risk, and they can't just expecting a sure thing. And I understand a lot of the problem is with these programs that a lot of and why they're under scrutiny is a lot of the investors are expecting their money back and to be paid back and with interest and all this other thing. So they're actually using a double whammy. They're getting the free visa, the get out of jail free card to come here and live, but then they want their money back, because I understand that's one of the areas where it's kind of has been turned into a scam.
That's what the IRS would allege. That
would they allege?
That's what they'd be looking at.
Was that with Lois Lerner?
Yeah, they would be looking at that, and they would be saying, look, what you're doing here is you're just kind of shuffling the money around, and it's not really going into the business.
It's not going into a business, but you get your visa anyway.
Right. It's not really going into the business. But I think they're looking at that pretty closely now. And one reason that it's getting more and more high profile is that Canada used to have some kind of investor immigration. They're not doing that as much or at all anymore. So. And
why is that?
I don't know why Canada shut theirs down.
Do you think it's because they found too much fraud in the program?
And maybe Canada's not as big. Maybe there's not as much room, so maybe they don't need more people.
Well,
I mean, the U.S. is looking at this because, the U.S. is capital starved now for a lot of different reasons we're not going to go into. But there's a lot of new rules, and capital has kind of fled the United States. So there's a lot of like most companies that make money. Like American companies that make money overseas don't want to repatriate it because there's issues
because of a huge tax burden.
But I mean, there's a lot of reasons. But basically, we're capital starved now. So the U.S. is saying, look, we want to bring in capital.
Right.
So where Canada may not need that capital, possibly. But so that's kind of more people are coming. And also, it used to be if you had Canadian papers, it was reasonably easy to immigrate into the U.S.
Yes.
So, I mean, it was like that was another way of getting in.
It's another freebie, because if you can buy your way into Canada, then you can get into the U.S.
then it's pretty easy to get into
on
the
a
US.
Reciprocity of Canadian citizens versus U.S. citizens.
Or even, you're not necessarily going to get citizenship, but you would get lawful permanent residence, you would get a green card. So that's some of the big issues. Now, another thing is what's involved for the person who does the investment. They don't have to do day-to-day management, but they may have to exhibit some type of management effort.
Yeah, well, I understand that they have to use some type of they have to have some ability to do strategic planning, to offer advice, and some kind of like official position, although they may not be involved with day-to-day, but they have to have some kind of official position so that they are actually participating in the company and not just a sham of saying that I'm involved, but they actually have to do something, and you have to have a record of that. And whether it's a board meeting once a quarter, or how many times a year, or whatever, I know that they have to have something like that to show that they are involved at some level.
Right.
But their involvement, it can be really low level involvement. Basically, they can have in time commitment. It can be a low level time commitment involvement, but they do have to have something on the books to validate their fact that why they got the visa and what they're doing, and they also have to validate that the money came in and that they have the workers, and that they're doing something besides just sending them home like dock workers in the old days, and and then who are you going to employ? I'm going to employ my brother. Where is he? Yeah, he's at home watching TV, but no, we need him on the books. So instead of having people on the books, they actually need somebody that's actually doing something so they can verify.
Right. Okay, so that's the EB5. Now there's also so there's about 10,000 visas are allocated per year, and at this point there hasn't been a lot of strain on it. It's not the H1 like the H1Bs where 50,000 and there's more applicants than there are positions. Right. Here it's been pretty close. Now with Canada shutting down, maybe that's going to change. Maybe we're going to get a lot more applications than we have.
Right.
And I think that right now immigration is a huge thing. Like a lot
of they're letting people across the border nonstop. Why does somebody have to buy their way in if they maybe can get in and then get free amnesty?
Well, I'm just saying. I think that if people can bring investment, I think that's a good thing because we are kind of capital starved. Now, there's also an an E2 treaty investor. Yeah, real alien.
Should I call home on that one?
Aliens, yeah, call
alien,
home.
It's the alien I need to call home. Phone home. Okay, so there's
an E2 treaty investor, and this is the same thing. It's an investor placing capital at risk with the objective of generating a profit, starting a new business, purchasing a pre-existing business. But the capital investment has to be substantial.
Okay, so when you say substantial, is that more than $1 million?
I think that,
or is that 100,000?
I think
because what's a substantial? Come on.
The ET. Well, I'm just saying there may be some countries that have a treaty with us and some that don't. So maybe it's a little less, but it just has to be substantial.
Well, wait a minute. Okay, so now I have a question. Is there an international verification of where the money came from to support the tracing aspect of where the money came from?
I think that's something that you just have to be able to verify.
Or should we just trust?
Well, I mean, that's something that if you get an audit by the IRS, you're going to have to have.
Well,
if
you have a cartel or you have a triad, are we supposed to trust?
Well, I'm saying that people who run businesses and they can say, well, this is my business, this is what I've done, I've generated income, or I inherited it and my father generated income this way.
Right.
I think you want to show that, hey, here's that kind of business, or that's how the money was generated.
Okay.
So
what are they actually doing on the scrutiny of this program?
Well, I mean, I'm saying there is like any other thing. There's they can audit it, and you want to be able to show that the money was clean money.
Okay.
And also, you're going to have to show that you did for a period of 2 years after approval, right? You're going to have to show that you after your I-526 application, that you've got these 10 employees working.
Well, we're going to see how this plays out because I know under this administration, immigration is a big deal. And I want to thank you, Mark. It was another great evening with Law Talk, and as we look forward